Hey, folks, greeting from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. You've got Brad, Spencer, and Tyler, all from the Offensive Security team, here to talk about the 2022 edition of the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, or DBIR, as we kind of refer to it. So, if for those of you that don't know, that is basically something that is almost like the pulse, generally speaking, of cybercrime and breaches and incidents and things of that nature. And so, it's a really interesting report. Verizon does a great job of putting it together, and we always like to kind of look at it when it comes in. So yeah, we're just going to kind of talk through this and look at some of the high points. And Spencer, you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Thanks for having me back on in another episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. Like you said, I really enjoy the DBIR report, much like DFIR reports and things like that. This is actual actors, actual incidents and breaches. So really good data from the trenches, so to speak. So the first interesting takeaway that I had was in relation to supply chain. And in the DBIR, it says that supply chain was responsible for 62% of system intrusion incidents this year. Unlike a financially motivated actor, nation state threat actors may skip the breach and keep the access. So that was a quote from the DBIR. And that seems interesting to me, given the news of the SolarWinds and Microsoft and things like that. So definitely an interesting topic, and I think makes sense that it is so high. 62% is a far majority of the system intrusions.
So, okay, I want to offer a healthy dose of skepticism to start us off, right? Is that elevated specifically because of the SolarWinds incident? Would be my question. I mean, we obviously probably don't have drill down into the data, but I would be curious to know if that is an anomaly. So maybe looking at an average of like 2021, and then maybe look at 2023. Just kind of look at that spread out over a couple of years, because I would wonder, because SolarWinds hit a lot of folks, and it
Mhm.
was very public and very well reported. So I wonder if maybe there was just a huge spike in this case.
Yeah, I think I'm not exactly sure of the exact specifics with what led to what in the intrusion category
Yeah.
or incidents category, but it did make a noticeable impact in the DBIR. So something to consider and look at in more depth for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will also say it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't necessarily, it's really for my own curiosity. It doesn't really matter if SolarWinds had a major impact in that. I think the fact that SolarWinds occurred should illustrate we should be paying more attention, which is the end goal of the DBIR anyway.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm just going through the notes on the DBR again to jog my memory. And I don't recall if they mentioned SolarWinds in there or not, but I do remember that number, that 62% third party, sticking out in my mind.
Sure,
Um,
sure. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of buzz around the supply chain stuff, and it's unfortunately one of the harder things, in my opinion, to fix, because we're talking about securing things that are out of your walls.
yep.
So, it's a tough sell. And you still, even for those of us that have like a super strong vendor management process, you still have to take their word to some degree. You have to read, and agree to the documentation that they give you. Generally speaking, it's
Yep.
hard to prove that a third party entity is secure in their workflow.
Yeah, and I'm looking at so DBIR has a year in review, and they do mention the 2020 SolarWinds, Orion, and Excellion attacks as being two notable events in February. So those are notable things from the previous year.
Oh,
And
those
then
aren't even included in this year's report then.
so those are the data is from the past year, right? So that would include anything that happened 2021. What I'm not sure of exactly is the time frame. I don't recall the exact time frame of the data for the entire report.
Yeah, no worries. Anyway, yeah, I mean, like I said, I think in the spirit of the report, it accomplishes the goal, which is get us talking about how we can secure, supply chain.
Yep.
So, good deal.
The next point from the DBIR was talking about threat actors and who's doing the breaches. And so a quote from the DBIR is, as we look back now with the benefit of 15 years of time-wasting apps, considerably more gray hair and a few chips off the collective InfoSec shoulders, we can confidently state that external actors are consistently more common than internal, with 80% of breaches being caused by those external to the organization.
Yeah, that's not terribly surprising to me, right? Um, it would be akin to saying, like, if you worked in the spy industry, like, how many double agents are there? They're statistically less common than outside spies. Kind of, I don't know if that's a good analogy, but it gets the point across. So
Sure, and there could be underreporting and things like that. What's interesting is I haven't seen, we hear of insider threat, right? And that was a big thing a year or two ago, maybe.
Sure.
Insider threat was a big thing, and I guess to some extent it still is. But it just kind of proves the point that for the most part, most organizations probably aren't going to be dealing with insider threats like they would be at Fortune 500 organizations, Microsoft's, the larger organizations. SMBs maybe not so much having to deal with this. I would expect.
Sure. Yeah, and there are a lot of mitigations that are in place for this in heavily regulated sectors, right? So energy sector, financial sector, even healthcare sectors. Most of those have pretty rigorous background screenings that are required by federal law or are required by regulatory bodies. So I expect that is probably part of the reason that we don't see a higher number. And in those heavily regulated industries, the pay tends to be a little bit better than non-regulated industries. So those are probably multiple factors that play into that. But yeah, I don't know, that's not totally surprising. I would actually say that 20% being internal is a little surprising, actually.
Does it seem high?
It does. It seems high to me.
Yeah, and there are cases like what transpired with Okta earlier in the year, just a few months ago, and there are instances where we've seen, potentially threat actors obtaining access through an insider, right? Paying for access.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not uncommon to see, initial access brokers or ransomware groups paying for initial access or paying for VPN credentials or something like that. So that's not, I don't want to say that's common, but we did see that potentially with the Okta breach. We did see that with other things in the news recently. So not uncommon, but yeah, to your point, Brad, 20%, maybe that is high. Maybe that is,
Sure.
Looking at it on the other side, maybe it's abnormally high.
It feels like it, but that's just, it's just my instant reaction. I will say that having come from a highly regulated industry where we did outsourcing out of the country, that was a big risk to us. Like, we took it really seriously because you don't necessarily get to individually background screen the mobile developer you hired from, Pakistan. And so, those guys over there do an amazing job of writing awesome apps, but you hire a company, not an individual. And so you really don't know where the data is or how it's being treated. And, there's a lot of risk to that. So yeah, no, I can totally see that. And bringing it to our attention is definitely legit. There was a case, by the way, and it was a year or two ago, I can't remember, where an insider it was at one of the big cloud companies. It was a female, and she left the company, but somehow maintained access to an API or something like that. I wish I could remember the whole story, but this kind of reminds me of that incident.
Yeah. Wasn't it a credit card company or something like that?
It was. Yeah, I think it was. like I said, I can't remember the details of it, but I remember finding it very interesting that, somebody was basically able to come back in and do some nasty stuff just with knowledge of the inside of where she came from.
There was an IT person or an IT guy that went to jail or was sentenced somewhat recently, last couple of years or something like that, for essentially, he was a disgruntled worker, I think got fired and tried to nuke the servers or destroy the equipment. So stuff like that happens. And that to me is selling access is one thing, and then actually destroying servers or destroying backups is another kind of thing that comes to mind when I think about this number is, disgruntled workers and the red flags to kind of identify those.
Agreed. Yeah. And talk about mitigation just quickly before we move on. Like, hey man, disable your stuff, right? like we have processes and procedures for disabling accounts preemptively when someone's going to get fired. But
it's something, for our ISO engagements, our assessments that we do, that's something that we look at. What is the onboarding and offboarding or termination process? Do you have a good process in place for that? So it's something that can be easily overlooked if you're get too comfortable in the job, or maybe you're trusting of everybody, and then all of a sudden you're kind of left with this incident in your hands. So
agreed. Let's see. So the next one that we want to talk about is the top discovery method for breaches. More than 50% are considered actor disclosure. So this is in the form of like a ransomware note or a criminal forum to sell the data or whatever it is. I read this as, in more than 50% of the breaches, the data owner did not detect the breach, i.e., the threat actor was finally gave himself up. Like, hey guys, just wanted to let you know I've been in your system for X number of whatever, and here's what I did. So basically self-reported. That's scary.
Scary, interesting, especially, this in the next takeaway from the DBIR goes together, I think, in some ways. But my cliff note on this was, the MITRE evals, the latest MITRE evaluation, right? Everybody scored 100%. Everybody stopped everything, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, how do we reconcile that with the fact that 50% of these breaches that were investigated or a part of the DBIR were the client or the company organization was notified by the threat actor.
Right.
That's hard to reconcile, right?
Yeah.
I think we obviously know the reason for that, but it's still an interesting statistic for us to look at and kind of theorize why that is, and how we can do better and all that stuff.
Yeah. I don't read that as threat actors are so awesome that they can hide from 50% of organizations. I read that as more than 50% of organizations are not doing an adequate job of detecting threat actors, because and we've talked about this in other podcasts and I think maybe even on some of the blog posts, but generally speaking, threat actors are using stuff we know about. They're not using 0 days. They're not using some technique that is magical. They're sending macro-enabled Word documents to people and running PowerShell to wget a freaking binary that installs ransomware. Like, it's not rocket surgery at all, and we're not detecting that stuff. And so, I mean, that to me is my takeaway, at least.
Yeah, that and signature detection comes to mind too, because a lot of times on pen tests, once we bypass AMSI,
it's over,
we have
man.
Free range. A lot of the antivirus products and the products that are not quite EDR, but they have some EDR features, the endpoint security solutions. Once you get past AMSI, I mean, there's really not a whole lot standing in your way, as long as you're not dropping files to the disk or dropping binaries and stuff, which you can run in memory, right? So
for all of you EDR, XDR vendors listening, stop relying on AMSI to do your work for you.
Yeah, which is essentially signature detection.
Yeah,
which
that's exactly what it is.
Has a place, but threat actors are still executing encoded PowerShell commands and still working.
Sure, man.
Like you said, and it's just this statistic is indicative of that.
It is. I agree with that.
And the next one, it feeds right into the next one, which is the vast majority of breaches include only a handful of steps. And they say in the DBIR 3 specific actions. So phishing, downloader, and ransomware, which is essentially what you just talked about, right?
Literally,
they're the most common, while very few breaches utilize 5 or more actions. So essentially what you said, a maldoc to a downloader to ransomware, and that's it.
So here's a crazy statistic. I was refreshing myself on Maldocs, and Black Hills put out a Maldocs how-to 4 years ago. Those techniques are still being used and are still effective today. We have not changed very much in the defensive landscape to react to Maldocs. So it doesn't surprise me that we're still using that. And
it doesn't help when Microsoft issues a patch for things like Folino, which we're going to talk about in our weekly threat brief, but our weekend review. Patch Tuesday came out, right? There's patches for all this stuff. Folina's in there, but it looks like they patched it with just a regex filter. So essentially bypassing it is a game of, can I bypass the filter, right? In which case, we all know, like when you look at WAFs or anything else that does filtering, there's usually a way to get past that filter if you spend enough time looking at it and playing with it. So
that's the world I live in the web application space, right? Is we love it when they blacklist stuff, right? Especially if they're blacklisting like ASCII or whatever. Okay, so fine, I HTML encode it. Now what do you do? Because the server is going to decode it, by the way. It's the same thing that's going to happen in this scenario. Is we're just going to get into the, like you said, the bypass game, which the bad guys always win. Because they have an unlimited amount of time to figure out how to bypass that filter. So that's disappointing.
Yeah, exactly. And getting back to the point of this item was, the 3 actions are the most common. The goal then is, how do we make the attack lifecycle? How do we make that attack chain take more steps, right? How do we put things in place that cause the attacker to pivot to another network or move to another system or make more noise so that they're much more likely to get caught. So how do we lengthen that attack cycle are things that I would be thinking about in the context of this, this takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, like I give you a perfect example is like having authenticated proxies with WCCP and block uncategorized requests. Like that would nuke 80% of this, and that doesn't mean they're not going to get by, right? You can still go buy a domain for sale that has a good reputation and you could work it out. But to your point, we just made it a little bit harder.
Host-based firewalls, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Something as simple as host-based firewalls, restrict those systems of computers, servers from communicating with each other, makes it much harder for an attacker to find a place to pivot to continue their goals, right? So
agreed.
Yeah,
and just having a solid EDR MDR solution. I mean, honestly, and we're not even talking about prevention. We're talking about detection and rapid detection. I guess EDR could be prevention as well. But yeah, good stuff, man. This is one that makes me sad because we have well-established blue team TTPs to stop every single one of these with a high level of effectiveness. And we're just not using them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of feeding into that, phishing, downloading ransomware, is a statistic that ransomware over time in breaches has gone up almost 13% this year. And so that's not really surprising. Ransomware is still a really big problem. You would never know it if you look at the most recent MITRE evaluation where pretty much everyone scored 100% on everything. So
shots fired, man. Shots fired. Yeah. But you had a really good question when we were pre-gaming this, Tyler. You had a really good question. We're talking about.
Yeah, it kind of begged the point in my mind that, like, why doesn't everyone do ransomware?
Yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic question, right? And so we're seeing ransomware go up a little bit. I would like to think that means that some other method of monetizing hacking has gone down, right? So maybe other methods are less profitable, and because that's how the ebb and flow of cyber works. But yeah, there are definitely other attacker or threat actor motivations, hacktivism, state sponsored proprietary information theft, stuff like that. Um, but I actually had made the comment that I thought ransomware was the most profitable form of cyber attacks. And Spencer, you were like, Brad, wrong. And you were like telling me why I was wrong. And I thought it was fascinating. I thought maybe that the other folks would want to hear this too.
Yeah, and it's something that I think people recognize when they hear the statistics, but BEC is one of those things that I think the amount of dollars lost
business email compromise, by the way. Yeah, for those of you who don't know what BEC is.
So the amount of dollar lost to business email compromise globally from June 2016 to December 2021, according to the IC3, is $43 billion plus dollars. So from June 2016 to December 2021, domestic and international dollars lost was 43 billion with a B, a capital B.
Capital B. That's crazy. $43 billion, man.
Yeah. And in comparison, I think it was 26 billion from I want to say when they were first reporting to 2016, maybe. I could be wrong with that number. But significant amount of money lost. I don't know if there's a statistic for ransomware, but I have to guess that it would be much lower than 43 billion.
I mean, I would imagine so, but that's just interesting to me that business email, and for those of you who don't understand how business email compromise works, there are a couple of flavors of it, but at a fundamental level, it is someone sending emails to people and asking them, hey, would you please transfer all this money to us? And that comes in a lot of different flavors. They can modify existing invoices that they find in, an O365 inbox, or they can just communicate to an executive assistant or whatever. But the point, though, like the takeaway from BEC is it is entirely a human problem. Like, 1,000,000% human. There are no technical controls that I'm aware of that will prevent that, except maybe like in some financial applications, they require 2 approvers, right? Yep. 2 human approvers. But barring something like that, I don't know of a technical control that solves BEC. Do you?
No, I mean, when you look at a BEC investigation, there's no initial access needed. I don't need to run malware on a system. All I have to do is either, mimic a vendor that somebody does business with. So create a domain that looks like the vendor's domain or the customer's domain or somebody they do business with. Or in real estate, it's very common for real estate for this to happen with, people who are buying houses and getting loans and stuff like that. There's multiple parties involved there. There's lawyers, there's financial people, there's the client, the person who's buying the house. So there's a lot of moving pieces there and a lot of opportunity for masquerading and disguising email domains. And in the other case, credentials are stolen and then email threads are hijacked. So in that case, multi-factor, conditional access, things like that. But yeah, to your point, it's the human element, right? It's like, how do you prevent people from clicking on links or downloading malware? I mean, you can to a certain extent, but it's something that I think will always be there. It's a con, right? Yeah. It's the modern day con man type attack.
Yeah, and there's some email security protections you can put in place, like Proofpoint, which we all know about, but there's no like silver bullet for email security, because at the end of the day, somebody can hijack an email, and then Proofpoint can't solve internal problems like that. So,
right, yeah, you would have to stack like 20 technical controls to even create a barrier that is still going to be, if a human wants to be stupid enough, they can still be that way, right? I don't know how to put that in a different way.
And Brad, you were saying, why doesn't everyone do ransomware? Well, BEC is a great attack, right? But
Yeah,
you were talking earlier about the motivations of an attacker, right? And not everyone is driven by purely financial games, right?
of course. Yeah.
APTs and political activists and stuff like that. And you had a really you were explaining kind of the differences, and I thought that'd be good for people to hear.
Yeah. So, it is important to understand what the motivations are, because that is going to the old saying we had when I was in the military was the mission drives the gear. And that's important here too, because when I say mission drives the gear, I mean like the objective of the threat actor is going to dictate the attack process by which they use. If I'm a BEC attacker, then I'm going to be looking for, non-MFA to O365 environments, or I'm going to be looking at, and this one is my favorite, when vendors list all their customers on a website. Like, guys, are you not paying attention, man? So stuff like that's really nice. So those are threats by which this particular threat actor, which is financially motivated, would look for. Ransomware, different things there as well. But yeah, so you have, the hacktivists, the anonymous folks, trying to think of some of the other politically motivated, but there's a lot of them out there that have different agendas, and they might just want to deface websites or cause harm with no financial benefit, right? So that's when we start looking at the integrity and the availability portion of the CIA triad. Yeah, absolutely. And then of course the nation state threat actors, who just morph into whatever it is that their particular mission might be. Usually it's stealing PI though.
Yep.
So yeah, so that, I guess those are reasons that we wouldn't always do ransomware. But it is still interesting that ransomware is a big thing, just because it is so specific of a threat, and there are very good technical controls that exist, but yet ransomware continues to grow somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too, because cryptocurrency has plummeted, right? And I saw something on Twitter today. It was like, well, wouldn't that mean ransomware would go down, or wouldn't be as significant? It's like, no, bad guys will just request cash, right? It's like they'll just request whatever the currency is. They will, they'll hold that data ransom for that.
Yep.
It could be gold bars, or whatever.
Right.
Cryptocurrency is just a great way for them to remain anonymous to some extent, right? But bad guys and criminals will seek, whatever kind of financial return that they're looking for, and it seems to me that it doesn't really affect the drop of crypto doesn't really affect ransomware at all.
No, because by the way, for those of you who've been in the cyber industry for a long time will remember this. We used to have what's called mule accounts. And the back before cryptocurrency was a thing, the way that attackers would get cash from compromised bank accounts was through mules. And a mule would be like an 85-year-old mom, grandma, whatever, that has that has like a checking account at a bank, and they would be like, "Hey, look, I'm going to send you a check for $6,000, and I just need you to wire 3 of it to me." And they would just eat the loss, but still get straight money wired to them. And then when the FBI shows up at Granny's house, she's like, "Man, I don't know. I got $3,000 to wire some money. What do you want from me?" And she's completely innocent. But so the cyber dudes these threat actors are gonna get their money. Crypto has nothing to do with it. Like you said, it's just a convenient way currently to move money.
Yep. Yeah, and that kind of leads into the next point of kind of carrying on the ransomware conversation one more time, because ransomware is
because we haven't talked about it enough, right?
Yeah, and we're going to continue talking about it and beat this to death, I'm sure. But in the DBR, they had a couple key points related to ransomware and the attack vector. Ransomware, 40% of ransomware incidents involve the use of desktop sharing software, and 35% involve the use of email. And it goes on to say there's a variety of different tools that threat actors use once they're inside the network, but locking down externally facing infrastructure, RDP, email, that goes a long way, right? Things that we're already talking about, multi-factor, having good internal controls for wire transfers, things like that. RDP, email, protecting your externally facing services is just vitally important.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into the next one anyway, because I think these all play together, and that is that almost all of the attacks came from known bad IPs. So at the time in which the attack occurred, and this is a long quote, so I'll probably skip it, but like, why aren't we blocking bad stuff? Right? Like at a fundamental, like a firewall level, at an email level, like we know who the attackers are and we know who they are when they attack, right? It would be like, if I'm going to be in a bank as a teller, and we distribute these things, and we're just like, hey, if anybody comes in a red raincoat, they're here to rob you, right? And we still let them come to the counter and be like, sir, how can I help you? So like, it doesn't make any sense to me that we're not blocking known bad IPs, and not even just that, like known file hashes, stuff like that. Like folks, let's do better, right?
Yeah, and what hit it home for me, just real quick on that, is 0.4% of the IPs that attempted RCEs, remote code execution, weren't seen in the prior phase. So 0.4% have not been seen before when they were looking at RCEs. So pretty significant stuff.
99.6% of RCEs were from known bad IPs. That is a staggering figure, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then quickly covering that last one, over 80% of the breaches can be attributed to stolen credentials, actually. Using stolen credentials, there's been an almost 30% increase in that since 2017, cementing it as one of the most tried and true methods to gain access to an organization for the past 4 years.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to end on, Brad, because
dude, please.
I mean, like talking about everything, ransomware,
I want a refund,
like
a full refund.
Everything we've talked about, we're still coming back to passwords.
Dude, okay, look, I have 3 letters that will solve this problem. MFA. It's not even a new thing, man.
Yeah.
Like why are these things happening? Or IAM or PAM, or like any of the 3-letter words that handle identities other than summer 2022 exclamation point. Like, we got to move on.
And to be fair,
wow.
It's getting to be not as much passwords anymore. There's things like the Travis CI news that was announced this week, where there was public Travis CI logs that had AWS keys in them. It's like, it's not even getting to the point where it's just passwords anymore. It's API keys in GitHub repos and in Travis CI logs and stuff like that. It's like, now we have all these cloud services and we have APIs that talk to each other, and now we have to worry about these credentials. So yeah, credentials are going to be the keys to the kingdom for a very, very long time. It's never going to change, and those have to be treated, appropriately.
It hurts my feelings, though. Still.
Yeah.
All right. So listen, folks, that's all we have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. That's really the best way you can help out. And also check out our blog over at offsec.blog. Thanks, and have a great day.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.